Hey, we are really happy to be with you again, doing these interviews. We have the illustrious, inimitable Doug Sarno with us today, who knows more than you could ever want to know about what we're talking about here in public participation. And my name is Michaelson, and I was one of the people involved in the development of the foundation's training. Doug Sarno was the other, and Marty Rozelle was the third. Of course, a lot has happened since then. But we wanted to go back to, like, what was it that really was the impetus for why we thought training and foundations and structure was needed back then, because we've realized most of the things that motivated us back then are just as true today, if not more so. So anyway, that's why we're here today. Margaret, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Margaret Harvie is my name, and I am, I guess I was one of the people that came up with the idea for this set of interviews, because I felt like it was important to explain to people how some of the IAP2 original kind of concepts came about. So thanks for that.
Margaret, you are too modest. It was your idea. And I'm just happy that you invited me to be a part of this. So thanks so much. So Doug, just some quick questions just for reference for people who don't know you. I'm in San Diego. Margie, you're in Sydney, and Doug, you're all around as far as I know.
Yeah, at the moment I'm in Florida. So
okay. And you travel back and forth East Coast to different places.
I am an East Coast guy. I right now am flipping back and forth between Florida and the border of North Carolina and South Carolina near Asheville, and also up in the Washington, D.C. area. So sort of here, there, and everywhere.
Sorry, thanks. A couple of preliminaries. How long have you been practicing public participation, would you say?
I would say a little over 30 years, 34 years maybe.
Yeah. And you didn't start out as a public participation practitioner, did you?
I did not. I'm a civil engineer.
Civil engineer, oftentimes clients of ours in these processes, no doubt. How do you think being a civil engineer affected your approach initially to public participation? Like, why did you make that transition? It's kind of an interesting transition.
It was a transition. It took probably a decade to fully evolve from an engineer, frustrated engineer, into a public participation practitioner. The challenge was that I was working on big federal programs, largely for the Environmental Protection Agency, largely around hazardous waste, radioactive waste cleanup. And we'd always do all this work. It would take years. We would get to the decision stage and we would have this answer, right? And we would think, oh, we got an answer. And we'd go out and we'd go to a public meeting and we'd deliver it, and then all hell would break loose. Everybody would yell and scream at us. And my engineering peers would say, you know, we have a people problem, which in their mind was we had the perfect solution. It's just all those idiots who just can't understand it, right? They just won't accept that we know what we're doing. And it occurred to me pretty quickly, and then it took a while for me to figure out what to do about it. We didn't have a people problem. You know, we had a communication problem. We had a relationship problem. We had other kinds of problems. But that, you know, to suggest that if we could just get rid of all these people, then we could get our solution done didn't make any sense, because the only reason we were cleaning up these sites was to help these people and to keep these people safe, right? So there was this whole like self-justification going on. Long story short, I got a job. I went to work for a nonprofit organization, and they had a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency. And that grant was to study the Superfund remedy selection process. How are we making decisions about these hazardous waste cleanups? And so I project managed this, and I was still a pretty young engineer. And I thought we were going to find some magic way of making decisions, a decision-making algorithm, or some special way of, you know, doing this just right. And in the end, what the study found, it was a year-long study. We did lots of interviews. We talked to lots of experts from all different walks of life. We held all these big workshops. In the end, the simple answer was, we have to learn how to engage the public better than we do. That was the #1 finding. And that was the beginning of my career in public participation, because I said, yep, that is right. And how do we do that?
Yeah. So what did that lead to in terms of initially or along the way during that decade? What started developing for you? What tools did you start using to help you be effective, or what experience or research did you draw on?
So this is the 80s. There wasn't a whole lot going on in public participation. There were some pioneers out there, and there was some early work that I got a hold of. But in terms of like training, there was just nothing in place. You couldn't get trained in public participation. I took some facilitation training, and I took some other kinds of communication and other kinds of training. And then, you just kind of made it up as you went along. And I wrote some papers on decision making. And that led to some people calling me from sites saying, hey, could you come out and help us? And that led to me being asked to help with a citizens advisory board at one of these really big radioactive waste cleanup sites. And I got the job. I quit my job and I opened my own consulting firm to do public participation, having never really done public participation in my life. And I had one client, one job. I made it up as I went along, and the rest is kind of history. I learned so many lessons on that project, and fortunately, it went really well. And then I said, okay, let's try to dissect and understand why it went really well. Like what happened? What was the cause and effect? I'm an engineer. I'm very nerdy about it. It's like we did this, and then we got this. Why? Why did that happen? Why did we get to those places? I still use that study. My very first public participation job is my best case study because I was there for so long, and the lessons learned are so crystal clear in my mind, and many of them are in the IAP2 training right now, because that was the test case for me.
What's interesting, Margie, is that when Marty and Doug and I got together to develop the IAP2 training initially, we came from very different places, we'd done different things. And yet the lessons that we learned from doing public participation seemed to be exactly the same. We were, I think, blown away at how aligned all three of us were, even though we had never worked together. And I think that was affirming that it was something that was true. It's not that we were smart, it's that we were good at observing human behavior and human psychology and sociology. I mean, and it appeared to be we were identifying some things that were fairly universal about how people react in these situations,
And I think if I could just come in there in terms of, the experience of picking up on that, over 20 years ago. And for me, in Australia, and I remember my first time I picked up the core values and I went, wow, these people actually understand what I do. And I guess it's that kind of understanding that humans are pretty much the same in, regardless of what country they are. And they were certainly very, similar in terms of response in Australia at that time.
There was sort of a public participation training out there, and I'm not going to name the name, but there was an organization going around talking about how to engage the public, and we'd all either taken it or seen it or had the manual, and it was really about how to persuade the public to go along with you, right? And that was exactly what we felt public participation shouldn't be, right? That wasn't public participation, and what we wanted to do. Lewis was talking about all of us having a similar experience, and all that experience always came down to fundamental principles. And what we said is our training needs to be based on fundamental principles, immutable stuff that is really tied to human nature. It's tied to how people learn, how they think, how they treat each other, how they work together, how they solve problems. And that's where we have to build the structure around public participation, rather than how to kind of persuade people or trick people or get people to agree with you.
Yeah. So how long had you been practicing before IAP2 came into existence?
I started my work the year IAP2 came into existence, I think.
So I'm just kind of curious. I had been practicing for a few years at that point. IAP2 came along, or IAP 3 at the time. And the experience that you spoke of, Margie, of like, oh my God, these people understand me. I mean, I think initially IP3 was all about, can we just commiserate with each other for a couple of years? But then this started growing was this notion that we needed these foundations. So what was your part, you feel, Doug, in kind of seeing the vision for that, other than your own experience?
Well, we had gone through some of the early work, developing the core values, and I became executive director, I think the year you introduced the code of ethics.
Yeah.
And that was on the table pretty quickly, but there still wasn't a there. There wasn't a profession, right? It was sort of a loose association of tribes trying to figure out how to do this. And I think language became really important to us. We looked at, people were calling it all different things, and there were just all different terminology, and our clients were confusing in how they talked about it. And that, I think, was where the training really started, with us trying to get a sense of, what do we call ourselves? What is this profession really all about? How do we use terminology to help frame what it is we do? And I think that was some of the earliest conversations I remember really trying to think this through.
Yeah. We've talked about that a lot over the years, about how fungible a term that is or should be, and how inclusive it should be, how exclusive. And this kind of interesting thing I think going on right now is, in the name of inclusiveness about stakeholders, I think it's become conflated with inclusiveness of processes.
Right.
So do you want to talk a little bit about, I think, how important it was at the time to clearly define some sideboards about what public participation is and is not?
Yeah. Well, and I think, that's the first thing in the training, and it's right at the beginning of our thought process, was, how do we define our profession, right? It's not that we don't understand that we connect to so many other professions, and we intersect with so many other professions, and that, the spectrum, ultimately, we'll talk about that in a little bit, was an effort to show that it's not all one thing, it's not cut and dried. But if you think about public participation, in how we felt, we made a conscious effort to define it as an agency or organization seeking input in a decision-making process. And that it was really important to understand that's what we're doing, right? And that doesn't mean that other things aren't happening at the same time. It doesn't mean we don't intersect with different processes and approaches and things happening. But that's what we were trying to carve out, is, how do you do that work, right? When there's a client or a sponsor really looking for that input, they intend to use it, and they intend to take action or do something with it, right? That's really how we kind of carved out public participation.
Yeah. Margaret, do you have a follow-up?
I was wondering if we perhaps could talk about the spectrum and really how that came about as a.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I think that there was a segue there, which was, a lot of people asked Doug, why is there inform on the spectrum, when in fact we say inform alone is not a form of public participation? It kind of goes against the definition you were just giving.
Right. And we don't say that inform is public participation, but it is on the spectrum of public participation to let us know when we're not in a participatory state. The spectrum was designed literally to be 0 to 100, to be the spectrum, the total range of possibility, right? And so what we felt was, it was really important for our clients and for us as practitioners to be able to discern when we were below the line, right? When we were just informing and we were not actually asking for input. And to make sure that when you're below the line, you don't act like you're asking for input, that you make it clear that you're not, right? And to take inform off the spectrum would have left us without that conversation piece, that anchor on one side, right? And then there's the anchor on the other side when you're actually handing over power in a way.
Right.
If you look at the spectrum, it's also about power sharing, right? Power sharing from none to total, right? And so that's another way to think about it. It is the full spectrum.
Yeah, right. Excellent. I know for me, I'm curious if this was your experience. For me, a lot of my frustration at the time was being asked to get involved to do public participation and assist with it, when, as you just said, there was an intent to use it, when in fact there was not an intent to use it, and it was a go through the motions. So, I mean, was that partially where you were coming from too, when you decided we needed something that says, no, this doesn't really qualify?
Absolutely. There has to be that moment where you decide, am I or am I not engaging in public participation, right? Community engagement can happen in the informed space, right? You're just engaging, you're building relationships, you're doing other valuable things, but you're not seeking input that you intend to use, right? So there's lots of good things that can happen, relationship building, trust building, all that can happen in the informed space.
Yeah. I remember when I first started doing public participation, I had trouble convincing people that they should participate because, frankly, no one had ever acted like they had anything, to use or worthwhile, or that actually would make any difference. And those were some heady days because people got kind of excited about it because, wow, they're actually listening to me. They're actually using my input. And then regulation after regulation after regulation, at least in the US, got passed requiring public participation. And it seemed like we were going down the other side of that hill, to where there was a lot of doing it because it was required, not because there was any value in it. And then I think that's where the cynicism about public participation started.
That and the lack of agency understanding of what they were doing, right? They were doing it as window dressing, not even really realizing that's what they were doing, right? They thought they were doing public participation. They were holding public hearings and public meetings, and they were getting public comment and writing responsiveness summaries. They were doing stuff, right? But they weren't actually engaging in public participation. And that was another reason that we felt the training was really important, to give structure to agencies and organizations to understand what they're doing and how to do it in a more fundamental way, right? And we did it from a principle orientation. We wanted to create something that gave them a way of thinking about it. We weren't giving them a cookie cutter approach to it. We weren't saying you have to do these things in this way or in these steps. We're saying you need to integrate your participation process into your decision process and think about it as you move through that process. And that was very structurally and strategically done that way, that we were tying our work to the work of making decisions.
No, I just wanted to come back to the spectrum because it's so widely used and so widely recognized. And I guess, I want you to reflect, perhaps, both of you, on, what did the conversation look like at the beginning that created the spectrum? I guess there's a lot of, I don't know whether it's true or not. Everyone says, well, it was clearly from Arnstein's ladder, and so were you
not even a little bit? No, I mean, it's not that we weren't aware of Arnstein's ladder and other tools that were out there, but we weren't really thinking about that at the beginning. What we were thinking about at the beginning was language. We were thinking about what's the different, what do different types of public participation look like? What's the differentiator in the fact that we know all public participation is not the same, right? And so we thought about some kind of a tool that could help with that. And we thought about underpinnings like how many people, the size of the population of the community you were engaging, or how big a project, how expensive the project, or how complex the project, or how controversial the project. And in the end, we were playing around with language, and we were playing around with different words. And the words kind of led to the idea that none of that stuff matters at all. What matters is how much power are you willing to share, and how much how serious are you in taking the input? And then how do you actually turn that into some sort of a tiered language structure? And we almost organically came out from there. Lewis came to us with that concept of the promise to the public. And that really defined the thing that defines the language that says, what are the expectations that you're creating to the public? And that became so important, right? It's not just, and the idea of this isn't a ladder. It's not higher is better, lower is lesser. We were really thinking about how do we display what's in our heads? And then we wanted it to be something that didn't automatically mean, you wanted to get to a more important or better or higher level, right? And that's why we kind of created this lateral function. It really fundamentally is about that, the goals and the promise to the public and the language of the 5 things across the top, which we tried to, in English, get to words that were as close as we could get to what we were promising at that level in the spectrum.
That's great. And I have to say that that's become, even though I've kind of worked with the spectrum for many, many years, those words have become richer and richer and more part of my practice as I go on. So it's a very
Margie, sorry. I was consciously aware as we started working on the spectrum of the ladders and the vertical hierarchical approaches. And I think what was in the back of my mind is this will never sell to the decision makers, right? This will never sell to the agencies. If we say, hey, you're doing a poor job if you're only consulting, and you're doing a great job and you need to work towards collaborating and empowering on everything, that was a non-starter. In my opinion, that was a complete non-starter. And so I felt like we can't be moralistic about this. We can't be normative saying this is better than the other. And I think that's changed over time how people feel about that. But at the time, I was thinking about acceptance, because it doesn't matter if we teach practitioners these things, if the decision makers and people who are the ones that make the decision about whether to share power or not are turned off by it. And so I thought we thought each one of these processes on the spectrum can work in the right situation, in the appropriate situation. But I think we were completely aware that this is a dance. This is a negotiation, right? With so many different factors about what the demands or the expectations are of the public, what the willingness and openness is to the decision maker, what the decision itself was. And that's really where it started coming from, was trying to think about this relationship between a decision maker and someone that they are going to engage at some level, and trying to make sure that that relationship was one that was broad enough and flexible enough that it could work for, in any given situation. And that's what was really appealing to us about looking at it, horizontally and not normatively, this is better, this is worse. I don't think the spectrum would have ever been adopted if we'd made it hierarchical, to tell you the truth. I don't think we'd be here talking.
I think we were very conscious of the fact that for public participation to work, there had to be full commitment from the organization at whatever level they chose. The decision maker had to be on board, the team had to be on board, everybody had to be on board, right? This is what we're doing. This is what we're delivering for our community and what we're using for our project. And what we saw, I think all of us had seen in a lot of our projects, is too often the level of participation, even if it wasn't conscious, was aspirational, right? The team hoped they could achieve this high level. And so they were creating expectations that were at a higher level than the decision maker was ever going to follow through on, And so I think it was to bring it to reality, to bring it to a practice, right? That was all. We were trying to really bring it to a level of practice. What can work? What works? What makes sense? And I think that everything Lewis just said, and that idea of commitment became very important to us, and thinking about, you have to tie commitment to that level that you're choosing.
To this day, I find I can sit down with any decision maker, show them the spectrum, in 10 minutes, they can give me a clear answer about where they are.
Yeah.
That's not many tools.
I've actually made it even simpler than that. quite a while back, I created a little flow chart, and I am an engineer after all, that is all about intent, right? It's just a series of questions about intent. Do you intend to, right? And you drop out where you should be on the spectrum, right? Because that's what it's all about. What's your intent with the public?
How do you use the code of ethics? Do you think it's still a relevant part of the foundation?
I do in the sense that, I feel like while neutrality isn't a requirement of our profession, and a lot of us don't necessarily serve that role per se, I feel like having someone in charge of the process is so fundamentally important. At the end of the day, we're process facilitators, right? We design and facilitate the process of engaging people in decision making. And I think the code of ethics is the one tool we have that kind of describes what that person is intended to do and not do. So I do think it's a fundamental key to our profession for sure.
I think it's an important part of the training because I initially drafted the code of ethics because I saw the moral dilemmas that all my clients were going through, being asked to do things that they didn't consider to be fair, in terms of the different stakeholders, that they were being asked to do things that favored one stakeholder over another. And I won't go into what those things were, but I think that's why I thought a code of ethics was needed, because it wasn't really clear what the role of a practitioner was. Was their job to be a kind of ombudsperson who helps the stakeholder be recognized and appreciated? Was their role to get the project approved and, like the other training, like get the people out of the way so they can do what they were always intending to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought if we don't sort that out, we're not going to be much of a profession. We'll never be trusted as practitioners if we can't sort that out.
Without the code of ethics, we don't have a profession. We don't have the basis of our profession.